Well, we are back at the first Sunday of the month, which means we are um, having a message related to our theme for this year, which is the Dirty Dozen 12 Character Flaws. If you turn over the bulletin to the very back, I'd like for us to read together the theme verse for this series, and we'll read the NIV together. Let's read it now. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Well, today, the character is blank, egomaniac. It's one thing to be full of pride, but it is a whole other thing to be an egomaniac. An egomaniac not only is full of pride, but they can't stand for anyone else to be as good or as popular or as powerful as they are. You can see egomaniacs who hold positions of power like some world, national, and local leaders. Egomaniacs fill the ranks of sports and entertainment superstars. An egomaniac can show up in church, a controlling pastor, or a chairperson of a ministry or committee who insists on having things their way. An egomaniac can be a parent or spouse who runs roughshod over the family. Each of us has to be careful of becoming egomaniacs if we have special gifts, talents, or have been placed in a position of authority. So don't just think of egomaniacs as them. We can be egomaniacs as well. Egomaniacs are easily threatened, seek to control others, and even want to humiliate or hurt others because they think that they are so much better. Now, I came across this cartoon and I thought it was funny. You may not think it's funny, but I did. And I don't know if you can read the caption, but it's the woman is sitting at this big round table, and you can tell that she is a corporate executive because if you look out the window, you see other buildings. So, and she's pretty high up. So this is some kind of corporate queen. And she's saying to an underling, I never wear perfume. That sweet smell is success. That's how she thinks of herself, that she is so successful, that she's so much better than everybody else that she doesn't even need to wear perfume. I wouldn't want my nose to get too close to her to test that theory out, but anyway, that's what she's thinking. Examples of egomaniacs would include Hitler and the Nazis with their idea of the Aryan race who was supposed to be better than any other people on earth. Any of a boatload of athletes. I love to pick on Michael Jordan for this. But, so many of them, they just have these huge egos. And Michael used to love to humiliate my basketball team, the Knicks. And that's how, he would just do things he was great. We know that. But he wanted everybody to know, and he would humiliate, not just beat, but he would humiliate you. There are prima donna actors and actresses who demand to be catered to. They had to have a trailer with their name on the door, and they didn't eat with everybody else because their nose were up in the air. They were egomaniacs. A CEO or a supervisor who sees workers as underlings. Each of these wreak havoc on the lives of others. So, who in the Bible is a good example of being an egomaniac? Who? Saul. Which Saul? There are two of them, so which Saul?
King Saul.
King Saul. Okay, not the one I chose. Ahab? Okay, not the one I chose. Who? Nimrod. Yeah, that would be a good one, but I didn't choose him either. Samson. I think I have him for something else, but yeah, not him. Egomaniac. Nebuchadnezzar was an egomaniac, yes, but I didn't choose him. Nor did I choose Pharaoh. My choice is, drum roll please, Haman. Haman, the egomaniac. In the past, when I've preached from the book of Esther, I've always looked at the story from Esther's perspective, and on one occasion from Mordecai's eyes. But in putting this sermon of Haman together, I discovered some things that hadn't caught my attention before, and so I'm so excited to share this message with you today. I will be telling Haman's story in 4 acts. It comes out like a play. You know, some of you have seen the movie about Esther, One Night with the King. Yes, One Night with the King. But this, in telling Haman's story, it just comes out like a play. And so I encourage you now to turn with me to the book of Esther. And we begin with Esther chapter 3. I'm going to read the whole chapter to you, and then I'm going to tell you what I have called Act 1, and then we're going to dig in and find out what's going on. So, Esther chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took the signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are given to you. Do with them as seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Act 1. Haman's promotion and plot. This is Act 1. Haman received a promotion from King Ahasuerus, making Haman the number 2 man in the kingdom. The only person who was higher than Haman was King Ahasuerus himself. Now, do you think that swelled his head? I would think so. He's strutting around, like, hey, I'm number 2. I'm over all the other princes. Nobody's higher than me except the king. Well, not only that, King Ahasuerus sent out a command that everybody was to bow before Haman. They were to pay homage. They were to treat him as number 2. And so this command goes out, and before we see what happens, I looked up Haman's name in the Smith's Bible Dictionary. You know what the name Haman means? Magnificent. And that's how he thought of himself. Haman thought of himself as being magnificent. I'm the best, you know. I'm the prettiest, you know. I'm thinking of Muhammad Ali now. I am the greatest. And so Haman's name means magnificent. And this is how he thought of himself for sure. And now that he has this promotion, nothing can touch him. But what you may miss, and which I have missed before in reading through Esther, is that Haman was a descendant of the Amalekites. He was an Agagite, and King Agag was king of the Amalekites in the days of King Saul. Now, you may call to mind what Samuel told King Saul to do, because God told Samuel to tell King Saul, remember the Amalekites, because the Amalekites were the first people to come up against the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness. And that's in Exodus chapter 17. And you remember that's when Moses held the rod above his head, then Israel prevailed against the Amalekites, and when his arms came down, then the Amalekites would prevail. And Aaron and Hur came alongside and helped him to keep his arms up. And Joshua won the battle against the Amalekites. Well, God didn't forget those stinking people. And so when Saul was king, Saul was told to utterly destroy the Amalekites, and not to take any booty from the victory that God was going to give to them. And you remember the famous words of the prophet Samuel when Saul comes back from his victory. You know, he's feeling good about himself. You know, I did what God told me to do. But what he did was he kept some of the sheep. And he did not kill King Agag. And so Saul comes back and he reports to Samuel, hey, I obeyed the Lord. And Samuel said, well, what is the meaning of the bleating in my ears? Bleating, not bleeding, bleating. He hears the sheep, and he immediately knows that Saul was disobedient. And not only that, then he sees King Agag, and it's Samuel who kills King Agag. The point is, there's this running battle of hatred between the Amalekites and the Jews. Now, Haman is an Amalekite. Now, you want to hear something that's very interesting? If you just flip back to Esther chapter 2, verse 5. It says, in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Do you know what tribe King Saul was from? The tribe of Benjamin. So now you have two descendants who are going to carry on the battle. I mean, this was just fascinating to me. So you have Haman, who represents the Amalekites, and you have Mordecai, who represents Saul, a Benjamite, and there's going to be a battle again. Some good stuff here. So, when Haman is promoted, Mordecai says, I'm not going to bow to this Amalekite. No way in the world, because they came out against our people. You see, Mordecai knew his history. But when Haman hears that Mordecai is a Jew, Haman knew his history too. And so that battle has to be fought once again. To me, this explains why Haman was enraged. He felt dissed by Mordecai. Who is this Jew not to bow before me? I'm number 2 in the kingdom. And instead of just taking his anger, his rage out on Mordecai, what does he say? I want to get rid of all the Jews. See, we're going to win the ultimate battle here. You know, this has been brewing for centuries now, and now I'm in a position, because I'm number 2, I'm in a position to do something now. And so I'm going to wipe them out. And I was just blown away by what he says in verse 13. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day. I mean, he really put an emphasis on it, didn't he? To destroy, to kill, to annihilate. He hates the Jews so much that he wants them wiped off the face of the earth. We call this genocide. He wants them to become extinct. He wants there to be no more Jews. And we know that this has to be the hand of Satan, because Satan is always after God's people. And so he has this promotion, and he comes up with this plot. Now, does he qualify as an egomaniac? I would say so. He is so much in love with himself that he can't stand to have this group of people who's been an ancient enemy of his people to even survive. He wants to get rid of them. But notice what's said in verse 15. While Haman and the good king Ahasuerus sit down to have a drink together, the capital city, the people in the capital, they were perplexed. They were bewildered. They were confused. What is this going on? Because in the capital there were Jews, and there were people that knew that they were Jews. Now, you will remember, if you know the story, that Mordecai told Esther not to reveal the fact that she was a Jew. But there were Jews in the capital, and I'm sure there were Jews that held important positions and that they were doing a good work. So when this decree goes out, the people in Shushan, the capital, why? What is this all about? Why are these people being singled out? There's some good people here. So that's Act 1. Act 2, Esther chapter 5, verses 7 through 14. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So Haman went out that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Isn't that big of him? And he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits height, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Act 2. Haman's bragging. Haman is giddy about being invited to Esther's banquet because it's just the king and him. So it's number one and number two. And he's, oh, I'm so special. She's having this private dinner party, and it's just the king and me. And so as he exits the palace, he runs into who? Mordecai. And it's just like, you ever have an experience where you're feeling good, you're all joyful and happy, and then you see somebody that, that gets on your nerve, and what do you say? Oh, that person stole my joy. Well, that's what happens to Haman. He's feeling it. Oh, I'm great. Look at what I'm being invited to. And then he sees Mordecai standing by the city gate. And it just drained him. All his joy is gone. But he says, I got this under control. I'm not going to lash out at this guy because his day is coming. I don't have to make a fool out of myself. I don't have to get out of character. He's going to get his. So he heads on down to his house. And he calls for his friends and his wife, and they are sitting together, and he starts bragging. Well, I got this promotion, and with this promotion comes all these quirks that I have, and my family's great. I have plenty of kids, and I've been invited to this private banquet that's sponsored by the queen. It's just the king and me. Nobody else is going to be there. So I'm special. But I saw that stupid Mordecai. And so what is all this to me when I still got to look at this guy? He wasn't even afraid. I'm sure you heard about the decree that's gone out that, by the end of the year, he and all his people are going to be wiped out. But he didn't even quake when I walked by. So, my joy was just ruined. And so his wife and friend said, oh, don't worry about it. Here's a suggestion. Why don't you have a gallows made, now 50 cubits high is 75 feet. In other words, when you hang Haman, it's going to be so high that everybody's going to see it. He's going to be a spectacle. And so he may have stole your joy today, but you're going to have your joy tomorrow. So he says, why don't you go and ask the king permission to hang Mordecai? So that sounded good to him. So he's bragging. But it's always a dangerous thing to brag, isn't it? So we come to Act 3, Esther chapter 6, verses 4 through 13. So the king said, was in the court. Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Now, let me stop and tell you what had gone on at the beginning of chapter 6. King Ahasuerus went to sleep, but he couldn't sleep. You know, you have one of those restless nights. You ever have a restless night where you just can't sleep, so maybe you get up and you read a book, a boring book, hoping that it'll put you back to sleep, or you put on the TV and hoping that the TV will put you back to sleep, or you turn on the radio. You understand that, right? So the king decides to have the journals of all the things that have taken place brought to him. Now that's going to be some real boring reading. But he's reading through it, and then he remembers this plot that was discovered where two of his servants were plotting to kill him, and Mordecai was the one who gave the warning. And so he asked his servants, did we ever do anything for Mordecai? And the response was, no, we didn't do anything. You didn't do anything to give him a reward for what he did. So, enter Haman. Now, Haman has in his mind this morning to ask the king permission to hang Mordecai. Now, the king just had a bad night, and he read this journal about Mordecai. So, now you have the stage is set, right? Verse 5. The king's servant said to him, Haman is here, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor. Now, before we find out what he says, now you know the stage is set, right? Imagine somebody who has the wherewithal to really bless you or reward you, ask you, and they don't say your name, say, what should be done for someone that I really want to bless, that I really want to honor? So now you're going to think about all the stuff you want, right? Isn't that true? So what does Haman want? So he says, verse 8, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse in which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man who the king delights to honor. So he's really done it big, hasn't he? Now, understand what he's saying. See, Haman sees himself as number 2 to the king. But it's like he wants to be number 1. So he says, let this person have a robe that the king has worn. So this is the king's robe that he's going to have put on him. And not only that, he's going to be on the horse that the king has rode. So you see, he really wants to be the king. So he's asking for all the stuff that, he doesn't care about it being leftovers. He just wants to be able to claim, I rode on the king's horse. I wore the king's robe. King for a day. And then he says, let one of the most noble princes be the one to deliver it to this man, so that everybody knows that this guy is important. Because one of the best princes is making this delivery, so this person is higher than the prince. And not only that, then this prince has to help him get dressed and then parade him through the center of town so that everybody sees him. And not only that, This guy has to be like the old herald. He has to trumpet out in front of everybody. This is the man whom the king delights to honor. You know, he's going to be shouting that. And so anybody that gets this kind of honor has really been honored. Would you agree with that? Now the plot turns. Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." Now, can you imagine how Haman feels? Not only did he not receive what he thought was rightfully his, but now it goes to his enemy, and not only does it go to his sworn enemy, he has to be the one to do all this stuff. Oh, man. Don't feel sorry for Haman, though. This is what has happened. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, I'm sure he was probably saying, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." I can't see him saying it with gusto. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. He was crying. This man was crying. He went home crying. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuch came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Act 3. Haman's humiliation. Is there any worse way he could have been humiliated? The table was turned so perfectly that it just boggles the mind. You know God had to be behind it. Poor Haman. Well, we come to the final act, and I'll give it to you, the name of it now. It is Haman's destruction. Haman's destruction. Esther chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to the queen, "Who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. You know, he had to cool off. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. I mean, he was really pleading, please don't get me killed, please. And he's just going after, and he just fell over on top of her. The worst thing he could have done, right at the moment when the king comes in. Boy. So Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hang Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Haman's destruction. When Haman is discovered as a perpetrator, see, Haman did not know that Queen Esther was a Jew. That was kept secret. And when that comes out, he knows he's in a world of trouble, because the decree was that all Jews everywhere in the kingdom would be killed, destroyed, and annihilated. Now, when he had the king agree to this decree, he never mentioned what group of people. He just said there's a group of people that they have their own way of doing things. They don't follow your laws, and so that's why he was with that. But he never said that they were the Jews. And so now when Esther reveals Haman's plot, Haman doesn't have any place to hide. You see what happened to this man? He was such an egomaniac. He thought that he couldn't be touched, and anybody that he considered to be below him was worthy of being trampled on. His head just got swollen when he became number 2. And what happened? Great was his fall. So what do I want you to remember from this sermon? A superiority complex leads to self-destruction. When you think that you're so much better than anybody else, it's going to lead to your self-destruction. It was Haman who destroyed himself. Now, you may not be as bad as Haman, but do you harbor a grudge against a group, feeling that you are superior? Have you used your position of power or influence to get back at those you consider to be inferior to you? It is sin, my brothers and sisters. Don't think that we are free from being egomaniacs. When we seek to harm those we feel are inferior, we are being egomaniacs. Ask the Lord to search your heart this week and to destroy that kind of thinking. I'll have on the back table a card to remind you of this message, and it says, how to avoid being an egomaniac. Don't let skills, talents, or position go to your head. 2, don't feel superior to any group. 3, don't try to harm those you see as beneath you. 4, confess any feelings of superiority. If you're not a Christian, I urge you to confess your sins, including being an egomaniac, and receive Jesus Christ as your Savior today. Let's pray.